So coming out next to the godly Dioscuri twins, we have a servant that I would say is a bit disappointing, but gets way better in the future in Canis. I know this is a servant that a lot of people are looking forward to, but upon release, I find her to be a little bit lackluster, and I'm a little scared because there are a few people that I've seen in my streams, in the comments, and even in the Discord, which, link down in the description down below if you ever need help with some FGO nonsense. We got the boys over there. But anyway, it worries me to see people summoning specifically for Canis because in my mind, she doesn't drop very well, and she's more worth summoning for after she gets her buff for her second skill, at which point she actually becomes a really solid servant. So if you're one of those people that is really wanting Canis, like she's a servant you've been really looking forward to, I will plead that you just hold out, wait for her to get her buff, because this means you can have more quartz for Castoria, and when you do summon for Canis, she's more usable, because right now if you summon for Canis, you can try to get some use out of her, but she's not going to be all that good. But we'll talk about that in today's video. However, if you enjoy daily FGO content, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I stream every weekday over on my Twitch. Go ahead and click that link down in the description down below. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into Canis, starting off with her hits. Which, Canis has a bit of a weird deck. She has the double quick, double buster, one arts card deck, which kind of leads into my first criticism with Canis. I almost wish she was an art servant, and I'll get into that a bit more when we start talking about her NP, because if she had an arts NP and could spam it a bit more easily, I think this unit would have kind of avoided a lot of the problems that she had on release, instead of being this kind of odd buster servant. But looking at her hit, she has 12.2% star gen with 3 hits on both of her quick cards, meaning she can actually gen a fair bit of stars. She's not going to be no jack or anything, but she can gen a few stars with those quick cards, as Canis does lean heavily into actually being a buster crit servant. Her NP gain is actually really high at 0.86%, and she is packing a 3-hit arts card, which does mean if you're able to get a crit on said arts card, which really shouldn't be too hard, especially after she gets her second skill buff, you can refund a massive amount of her NP back. It also means the extra attack, which is packing the godly 5 hits, which we love to see, can actually gen a fair bit of NP, because if you guys don't know, the extra attack is a composite card that gen stars NP and does big boy damage, but it's very reliant on your natural values because unlike the other cards, it can't crit, so it has no way to compensate for lower natural NP gain or lower natural star gen, so thankfully she has high NP gain and some pretty decent star gen, so you can actually make some use out of her extra attack. But realistically, the name of the game with Canis does come down to her NP, and her skills are kind of okay. Again, I'll touch up on her second skill getting buff, and I'll kind of talk about what it does to really show how much better she actually gets. But even when you dive into her skills, starting off with skill 1, it's just really lackluster. She's getting the monstrous strength buff, which in and of itself isn't a bad skill. It's a 40% attack buff for 2 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, so kind of taking the opposite route of a charisma, which is like a 20% party-wide attack buff that lasts for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. Instead, she's being more selfish, taking all of the attack for herself, but there's really no secondary effect. I would really like to see them smack something else onto this skill, maybe additional crit damage. I know she gets crit damage on her NP, but just so she has another way to kind of access it a bit easier, because it just really leaves this skill feeling a little lackluster. I think maybe even just like a 20% buster buff or a 20% NP damage buff for those 2 turns as well would go a long way, because that would allow her to double buff herself with 1 skill, and it just, I don't know, feels a little lackluster. Even though the attack buff is strong, for one, it is only there for 2 turns, which does limit Canis a little bit to only being able to burst really hard on said 2 turns, when a lot of the fights are going for more 3 turns in the game. That's kind of the general sweet spot that you want to hit. And then it's just not very common to see skills that only have 1 effect anymore. You want to have servants that have just chock full of different effects. Now, before somebody comments, I am aware that she does have a passive 12% buster buff in her Madness Enhancement. That's why I was recommending we maybe give her a 20% buster buff, because then in total she would have a 32% buster buff. And then 32% buster for 2 to 3 turns is about average, and it would definitely leverage her a little bit more damage, because as we'll talk about later, she also doesn't do a whole lot of damage with her NP. So already seeing a little bit of issues here with skill 1. Then we move on to skill 2, where Canis gives herself this on-attack buff that only lasts for 3 attacks for 3 turns, but it actually has a pretty decent effect that every time she attacks, she gets a 20% attack buff for 1 turn, and then she also lowers the enemy's attack by 10% for 1 turn whenever she hits him with those normal attacks as well. The problem here, though, is that you guys have heard me say in numerous videos that the way that damage is calculated in FGO is that you want numerous buff types, because the same buff types add into each other, but different buff types multiply into each other. That's why someone like Karna can actually get away with doing so much damage, because his mana burst is a 30% buster buff and a 20% NP damage buff, so it's actually more than if he just had a regular 50% buster buff. And this is kind of the problem with Canis on launch, is that she only has a way to massively gas up her attack, which doesn't really do as much as you think it does. And I think it really shows when you look at her damage, where it's just not very good. Again, we'll kind of touch on that when we get to the NP damage towards the end of the video, but this skill does get a bit better after it gets buffed, because it keeps the same, you know, on attack buffs and everything, where she gets 20% attack every time she attacks for 3 attacks, and she can lower the enemy's attack by 10% every time she attacks. But then she gets a 20% battery, and then she also refunds 15 stars every turn for 3 turns. So this not only makes her much more consistent as a buster crit servant, because now she's fronting her own stars, but it also kind of fixes the issue a little bit of her only having 1 arts card and sometimes struggling to get to her NP if you're not getting her arts card, because she only has the 1 arts card to really refund her NP. Although she is still definitely a product of the time, because she got the 20% battery and not the 30%, and if you don't know why that's such a big deal, is that you really want the 30% battery so that you could take advantage of the 20% append skill to give her a fake 50% battery, which makes her compatible with all the 50% starting charge CEs and Koyenskaya. So even though the skill upgrade is really good, it does make her a lot more consistent, especially the stars every turn. She still suffers, unfortunately, from the problem of leaning way too much into a singular buff, the NP battery just being slightly too small, but at the very least the stars do make her very consistent as a crit servant. Then finally we have her third skill. I really don't have any complaints about this skill. It's just a pretty good guts at 3k HP that lasts for 3 turns, and it gives her some massive damage cut for 3 attacks. So at the very least, even if her offenses aren't the best, you can be pretty well assured that Canis is going to stick in the fight for quite a while. She is pretty beefy. But as you guys can see, her skills are just like lacking a little bit of oomph. Like, I'm not trying to be mean to the people that have been really looking forward to Canis. She's just a little disappointing for me. With only 1 effect on the first skill, the second skill just going too much into buffing 1 type, and then her third skill is fine as survivability, but she's just lacking 1 more piece. Like, she needs something else to kind of give her that push to make her a bit better. Again, I think something that would go a long way is just slapping a 20% buster buff on the first skill. I think that makes her significantly better. However, the whole reason I'm not super hard on Canis is that when we look at her NP, this is kind of the best part of her kit, because this kind of turns it around. If you can consistently get Canis's NP off, you are going to be greatly rewarded. And this is actually really easy to do if you can put her with double Koyenskaya, because Koyenskaya makes Buster Servants very consistent. And so if you're not trying to farm with Canis, which is going to be a bit hard to do because she only has a 20% battery, if you're bringing out a challenge quest with double Koyenskaya, you should be able to stack her NP numerous times. And the payoff is really strong because she stacks crit damage and she stacks NP damage every time she fires her NP, and those both last for 3 turns. And the crit damage is a 50% value. To put that in perspective, that's Waver's crit damage buff, so it's not nothing. And even if you have a kind of janky team setup, you should be realistically able to get 2 stacks of her NP damage and her crit damage up pretty much at all times, even with just like a decent setup with things like Waver and, I don't know, maybe someone like Merlin or a friend Koyenskaya. Even bringing someone like a friend Castoria could really help with the NP gain and just the massive amount of NP she can shove into Canis. Might also be something that might be a little janky but actually kind of work out for you, because then Canis can actually start putting in some work because her crits will really bite and her NP can actually start doing a decent bit of damage. But as you guys have seen with the NP damage chart, she's quite low over there. She's only really beating out people like Elizabeth, who is a year 1 servant, and then Romulus, who's also a free-to-play year 1 servant. Don't be deceived, the Jean Santalili and the Hector both there are free NP5s, and they actually do hit harder than Canis as well, which is a little unfortunate. And so she's really just lacking some pieces that I would like to see her get in the future. She's definitely a servant that has good potential to be really strong, but she's just not quite there yet. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I think if you really want Canis, you wait for her to get her buff where she becomes significantly better, and then save the Saint Quartz that you have right now for Castoria. But like I said, leave a comment down below what you guys think about Canis. If you're looking forward to her, if you are going to summon for her and just ignore all my advice, that's perfectly fine, but I'm just saying you want to be saving for Castoria because it's going to be a sad day if you don't get her and then everyone else is just crushing the game with Castoria. With all that being said, make sure you like the video, subscribe, check out the Twitch and the link down in the description down below if you need help with FGO. We have a Discord where you can come in there and people will help you out with, friending you to help you get through certain parts of the game, or if you have questions, we definitely have people that can help you out with that. If you want to support the channel for free, you can download LD Emulator, which is just a really good way to play any gacha games on your PC, and you could go to Loot Cakes and join my alliance, where basically anytime someone in my alliance spends money on FGO, we all get points for it, and you can use those points to buy gift cards. So, free ways to support the channel down in the description down below. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.